Hello and welcome to Buy Africa, the show where we focus on investment opportunities around the continent. I'm your host, Tshepo Modiba. Today, joining me on the show is Brian Dlamini from Afriwise Consult to speak about, I guess, the very topical topic for this week, which is Burundi in particular. Brian, we all, I guess, if you tune into any news station right now, the coup is all anybody can talk about. Your assessment of what exactly is going on?
Well, from where I stand, I mean, I'm not a political analyst as such, but I mean, clearly there's serious issues for whatever reason, you know, that the country is experiencing instability on the political front. The issue is that there will obviously be a spillover into the economy. For now, nobody has said. Nobody has been, you know, talking to indicate which stance or which way they'll go, except for one mind that has already come out and said this is a sad situation because they employ some of the locals, and by virtue of that, they also employ people who are now fleeing, you know, and becoming refugees in Rwanda or DRC for that matter, or wherever else in the region.
So just to, I guess, recap for viewers that may not know, the constitution in Burundi only allows for 2 presidential terms. The sitting president is looking for a 3rd term, and that's really where the political turmoil started. Now, if we take a step back and actually look at that before the political turmoil, what has the Burundi economy been looking like?
Well, I think just to paint a picture, I mean, we've got a similar story here like Rwanda. You know, you've got a 1993 to about 2005 period of civil war. Around about the same time, Rwanda had its issues. And then post that, you've got the Arusha Accord, which secured stability, championed in some ways by South Africa. Now there was a period of, let's call it relative stability, but one always knew or felt that, you know, there were issues bubbling in the system. And clearly those have now come, you know, to the surface yet again. But having said that, from a low base or base perspective, the country has seen quite a lot of, investment appetite. I mean, FDI numbers were quite impressive around about 2012. Obviously from a low base, 260 odd million US dollars foreign investors. There was also local investors. 3 main sectors: ICT, agro, the agro processing or agribusiness sector, and then you've also got the manufacturing or processing sector that saw some, you know, positive developments there. And of course, I mean, you've got reforms that were that came about in the country, you know, a new investment code in 2009. So let's call it the country has been building gradual progress and gradual momentum since around about 2005.
And from a growth perspective, have we seen significant growth?
Well, it hasn't been as high as the neighbors or the regional peers. I mean, the thing to note is that Burundi is a small economy, right next door to Rwanda. It's not a resource-rich country.
Similar to Rwanda.
Similar to Rwanda?
Yes.
30% of the economy is made up of the agricultural sector. So the exports, you know, tea, coffee, those type, rice, those are exported to the Eurozone, and which makes about 90% of their export. Now, if you look at that and you say, look, what more could have happened? Well, you know, apart from focusing on the 3 sectors that I had said, there was really no spectacular growth as such. There's no, you don't get the same feeling like with Rwanda, that it's a services focused economy. There's, you know, steps and a game plan of sorts to attract investment.
And the relative lagging, I guess, relative to Rwanda, which is a great illustration given, you know, for the most part, the economies should be fairly similar. Has that been a function of policy?
Well, that's on one part. And the other thing, I think it's very good that you also touch on the Rwanda story. There are some similarities, even in the ethnical issues. One might argue, I mean, based on where you read that, that's also similar. But I think the difference there is, there are peculiar internal dynamics that are peculiar to Burundi that have driven the way, the country has come out of civil war, and then the way it finds itself currently, in this situation as such. Right. That's their own internal dynamics. Right.
Yeah. You touched a little bit on a ramping up, I guess, from a low base of foreign direct investment. Has that picture slowed down with a build-up of political tension?
Well, I mean, I think it's very important that one must also note that despite the place being a tough operating environment, you've got players who operate and are very competent in operating in these types of environments. Yes, so it's not to say that everything comes to a standstill, and because Bujumbura is in trouble now, the whole of Burundi is also in trouble.
Right.
The country, yes, I mean, one can, looking at the headlines and reading a lot into the situation, it is a tough place to be in right now, but that doesn't mean that everybody is packing their bags necessarily. I would imagine from an investor's perspective, it's a wait-and-see game. Right. There's a Great Lakes Conference, I mean, that was also, that was when hosted yesterday, and one would hope that from that, clear direction in terms of where the region stands would come out and would maybe drive, let's call it the political machinery in Burundi to go in the direction of restoring stability. Right. I mean, the country is very important for the region. It's very small, yes, but it's right next door to Lake Tanganyika, bordering Rwanda on one side, bordering DRC on one side, which have their own peculiar issues. And generally speaking, the country needs the rest of the EAC to exist. So sure. It's an important issue.
Sure. Now, if we, I guess in the ideal scenario, some sort of political stability, we return to some sort of political stability in the short term. If that doesn't happen, what are the implications? Are we likely to see those investors currently in Burundi pulling out? Or do you think that it's more likely, as you touched on, a wait and see from those investors who are currently there and those who are thinking about it, really just waiting to pull the trigger?
Look, I mean, I think generally speaking, it's going to be a wait and see. And from whichever way you look at it, I mean, we must also put into the equation that when we talk about foreign direct investors, we're talking even about Kenyans. Right. Who are right next door, who you would imagine, would be 9 times out of 10 a little bit more comfortable, you know.
Because they understand the dynamics
of the market. Because they understand in the region, what's going on. And they have certainly said they are going to wait and see this one out. I mean, 300,000 people have fled the country into neighboring countries. So clearly there is a problem, and I don't think it's to say that, that's the general stance from everybody. They're just going to pack up their bags and leave the country. I think some people are obviously going to wait, see, and it's very difficult anyways to uproot a business and go and pluck it somewhere
depending
else.
On the nature
of precisely the point. So you are forced, for instance, if you're in the mining sector, to perhaps shut down your operations. Yes, it will impact profitability, but I suppose you're also forced to take a stance where you try and read into the situation and maybe then factor that in to how you operate.
On the assumption that some sort of political solution or stability can be returned to fairly quickly, I mean, military coups like this aren't unique to Burundi. We saw a similar thing in Egypt as an example, maybe not quite using that word. On the assumption that we can return to some sort of stability, how quickly can the country find its feet again?
Look, from what I've picked up, I mean, there have been noteworthy reforms in Burundi that have put it where it is now. Obviously, I mean, like I say, from the low base that it was. So one would assume that there's still a bit of momentum there and hunger for government to get things going as quickly as possible.
Right.
So my expectation is that I would see, you know, direction certainly coming from authorities to put the country back on the right path. Like I say, this is also a regional issue. So, I mean, there's a railway line that has to go through the country. So
yes,
they have to make it work as well.
So there's a strong incentive for neighboring countries.
So there's a strong incentive for a stable Burundi. I mean, we all probably heard what the Tanzanian president also had to say. Very firm, very resolute in his stance, saying, look, we need a stable Burundi. And I think from a business person or an investor's perspective, that is a sign of reassurance.
Right.
And it gives you confidence that, you know, perhaps this situation is getting addressed at the very highest level. And that, you know, the players or stakeholders in this equation really want things to go right.
So from a, I guess, to wrap up, from a final overview of the country, lots of uncertainty, but not necessarily you want to write off for the long term.
No, I mean, I'm not a, I don't like to play, you know, the lottery with these type of things, but definitely I wouldn't say, you know, it's similar to other cases that we've seen where it's instability and then just general lack of concern from the region. I mean, the AU is involved in this one as well. They've already issued out, you know, a position which says we want this thing resolved as soon as possible. Like I say, even as far down as South Africa, there've been, you know, strong signs there of concern. So overall, I think it definitely, without, you know, looking to predict the future as such, but definitely it seems like there's more concern, there's more being done with this one than I've seen, certainly in other cases.
Sure. Let's leave it there. Thank you, Brian. Thanks to my guest, Brian Dlamini from Afriwise Consult. That's all from Buy Africa this week. Remember to follow me on Twitter. That's at Modiba_Tshepo, and send us your thoughts about the show using the hashtag BuyAfrica. For myself and the team, goodbye.